What's up, people? This is Lance Danger here, and this is the second video of audio commentary for the chapters of Fred Peterson, The Mighty Warlord. For those who don't know, in August it was the beginning of the 10-year anniversary of The Mighty Warlord on Drunk Duck. I haven't been able to celebrate it as much as I want to because a lot of things happened and things just got ultra busy, but right now I'm going to try to get into the role of it, the swagger of it a little bit. It's 10 years. I gotta pat myself on the back for that one. And first of all, I want to apologize if there's like a lot of background noise. It's been a pretty busy day around the area, and there might be some construction work going on as well as like the normal train noises and whatnot, and it's just a typical New York day. So anyway, in the first video, of course, I gave commentary about the prologue to book one, which is, of course, a chapter the epilogue. I actually did that after I had finished drawing chapter 2 originally. And when I decided to do this as a webcomic, actually, this next story is, I did it after as well. I had finished the chapter 1, 2, and the prologue. I did this one because I kind of wanted to just branch things together in a way a bit more organically, and also because I was kind of inspired by like the short stories that came on the web from Spider-Man at the time. Batman was doing like viral videos as well for The Dark Knight, and a lot of movies have started doing that kind of stuff, really inspired by, of course, the Blair Witch Project and The Matrix, which were kind of like the originators of doing like these small online things to kind of build more hype and to kind of like build the world of those movies a little more and flesh it out. So the Webisodes, I did this kind of to like branch in between the prologue and chapter 1, since there wasn't really much story in between both of them, especially since the prologue was done so kind of spur of the moment. I did the prologue after I had finished drawing chapter 2 in its entirety, and a lot of it came from the dissatisfaction as well of how the art came out in chapter 2. And I worked on the prologue, as I believe I mentioned, in a very weird period of my life, so the artwork came out even worse in the prologue, I think. And eventually I redrew the whole thing, and then like the webisode, it was kind of like in a stage of my life where I was like, okay, I went through a lot of stuff. Now it's time to just strap on those boots and keep on walking. So this was kind of like the first the first chapter I did after a couple of years of having done chapters 1, 2, and the prologue. And it was the first one that I like immersed myself in. Okay, let's try this computer coloring thing, and let me try and do a different style as well. So that's why also there's like such a huge difference in styles between the prologue, the webisodes, and chapter 1 and 2, and then chapter 3, because again, chapter 1, 2, and prologue were the ones that I did pretty much all back to back to back. And then the webisode short stories and chapter 3 forward is when I started doing the comic again, when I started drawing and producing it again. So yeah, it's a bit of a complicated storyline, almost Legend of Zelda worthy there, I guess. So let's hop on to it. And as you can see, I have been tinkering around on my website to enhance the reading experience on my webcomic. And this comic, this cover was not the original cover. Originally, I had used a pinup for the cover that I had made based on a song that I absolutely love from a Spanish band called La Oreja de Van Gogh. The song is called Rosas. I actually redrew that image and used it as the title image for these webisodes, but clearly this cover was done more recently, a couple of years ago, when I decided to kind of give it a bit of a more updated look. And also I was planning to do printed versions at the time, and this was actually originally going to be the cover for a volume. It would have been volume 2 for the comic, pretty much like the cover for chapter 1 that you'll eventually see, and the cover that I did for the prologue as well were meant to be covers for physical copies. Well, this one was meant to be for the second volume, which is pretty much chapters 5 through 7, which is more centered around the relationship between Fred, Cheryl, Jane, and John. Like, it's the chapters where Cheryl gets jealous of Jane and such, and hence why it's kind of like a blue monochrome kind of cover, like everybody's kind of like looking away from each other, kind of like, well, just blue really. So yeah, that was pretty much the idea behind that cover. And since in a way the webisodes are kind of like that as well, like they're more personal short stories, kind of fleshing the characters out more, I thought it would resonate more in this area as well, especially since the plans of doing the volumes back then were scrapped because a lot of the original files I had got destroyed, so there was no way to make a quality physical copy of the actual pages that are being used for the webcomic at that time. So currently I'm actually redrawing the whole thing from the beginning again to actually have physical copies of the comic book, of the webcomic, and as well as introducing a couple of things, but that's a topic for another day. So that's the story behind this cover. It's actually one of my favorite covers that I've done, especially color-wise. And as I mentioned, this is how the original cover looked like. This is a redrawn version of it. I decided to redo it and used it as the title page for the webisodes on my website. There's Fred and Cheryl, and there's the title of the comic, Restless Night. Again, as you can see, I've been working on my webcomic section. Like, I've now put the title at the top as well of each the individual chapters, and putting buttons for like the previous, next, current, etc. So that's pretty much the story behind that. I just wanted to redraw this one. I'm probably going to redraw this image again because since this was part of a pinup series that was inspired by songs, I never got to finish it. But to commemorate the 10-year anniversary of Warlord, I'm like, what the heck? I'm going to revive that music series inspired pinups, and I only did like 5 of them or 6, so I'm going to just redo them, and I'm going to continue with the original vision I had for them. So stay tuned for that one, guys. And here is page 1. This was one of the most challenging pages I've ever did at the time, because I was trying out an entirely new style, and I was computer coloring a comic page seriously for the first time, as well as learning new techniques to do it. And here I'm much more manga inspired, as you can see, much more inspired by Nobuhiro Watsuki and the mangaka, I don't recall the name right now, the mangaka that wrote and drew Gun Parade March, the Gun Parade March manga, which influenced this webisode and a lot of the chapters, like easily chapters 3 through 7 maybe. The art was very influenced by this mangaka in particular. I feel so dumb for forgetting his name right now. I'll likely put the name in the description box, or I'll make an annotation or something. But yeah, I started the story off with Jane. She is really one of the more important characters of the story, to the point where she's pretty much a co-protagonist. Like, even though it is called Fred Peterson, the Mighty Warlord, it's kind of like an ensemble cast. Really, like, I can't imagine right now this story functioning without one character or the other. Like, every character is so important. And again, like, I wanted to, like, flesh out her personality a little bit, kind of show off, like, how she thinks and feels about things, and in particular of Fred. In the story, they are best friends, but at some point during that friendship, she developed a crush on him that eventually turned into deeper feelings. But of course, Fred is with Cheryl in this point of the story, so. And Jane herself is in a relationship, even though it's not the best of relationships, as we saw in the prologue. And as we continue to see later on, it's not a very healthy relationship. In fact, it's actually pretty toxic. Spoiler alert, I guess. But you'll see as the story evolves. And this is actually one of my favorite pages. This is probably my favorite Cheryl page. And again, like, these were meant to be like little fun short stories that came out to flesh out the characters. I think this page, in a visual sense and also in the writing sense, it kind of captured her pretty well. I was experimenting with the coloring and doing effect techniques like the blurring in the 5th panel, practicing angles like in the 6th panel, and there's actually a blur effect as well in the 3rd one. And it was fun doing all these things, just like experimenting, seeing what I can do with the coloring, as opposed to like trying to do it traditionally. And here she is talking with John again, like one of the central stories, one of the central plots of especially book 1 and 2 is the relationship between John, Cheryl, and Fred, because pretty much how Jane developed feelings for Fred eventually. They know each other since childhood. Cheryl just came into the picture in high school, and John also knows Fred and Jane from childhood. Like, they were a pretty close group, even though that's one thing I regret from book 1. I never really portrayed that as well as I could have, the closeness of all 4 of them, and especially the closeness between Fred, Jane, and John. Even though there were sporadic moments where it did happen, people would understand it clearly that there's a deep friendship connection between all of them. I feel like I could have explored that a little bit better. But again, John, very much like Jane in a sense, he, contrary to Jane, like, it was like love at first sight with Cheryl when she first came on. And I'm going to explore that story a little bit more later on, after book 2 is done, which I'm pretty much more than halfway done with book 2. At least I hope I am, if I don't decide to flesh some things out more. And of course, here is John with his brother Jeff. And John is a type of character that he, again, spoiler alerts for those who might not have read the story up until this point. John, as a hero himself, and Jeff as well, the curious thing about John is that when he's a hero, he's everything what his alter ego isn't. In other words, when he is the leader of this government-sponsored super team, he's confident, he's decisive, he's a go-getter, he's defiant even to a point. And he has all these qualities and characteristics of a leader, of a natural-born leader. But once that mask is off, it's like everything leaves with that mask as well. Like, he's very insecure, he doubts himself, he's afraid of repercussions of acting upon maybe his impulses or his actions or desires, and he is very introverted in a sense, but in a way that also helps complement Fred as a friend, because he is usually there for Fred to listen to him and advise him, console him, help him, and whatnot. He is, in fact, one of Fred's best friends, probably the closest friends he has besides Jane and of course Cheryl, to the point where John is pretty much the brother that Fred has never had. Even though, again, I hate that I haven't portrayed that as well as I could have in book 1 and to an extent in book 2, but book 2 is not over, so I'm still I still may be able to salvage that in that sense. And of course, here's John doubting himself, very introspective, and out of all the characters, I think I kind of relate myself more with John in that sense, to be honest. A lot of people think that Fred is me, basically, but I'm a little bit more like John more than Fred, to be honest. And if I were completely honest, I'm pretty much like a midway point between Fred and John, pretty much. If I want to get like all psychoanalytical about the characters and my own self or whatever. And of course, Jeff is the more livelier of the three brothers, because there's actually three brothers. That's been noted before in different chapters, that there is a sister that has not appeared in the series yet, and she will appear later on eventually, and all hell is going to break loose. That's all I have to say about that for now. But a lot of people reacted very well to this short story of John. A lot of people really sympathized with him. Like, he's a very sympathetic character, except for maybe in book 2, where people are like, man, that son of a bitch. And I really enjoy the kind of different emotions that the characters evoke in people. And of course, here's the debut of Funny Bone. He was not in the prologue, kind of like John. John originally wasn't in the prologue, but in the remake I did for my website, and the printed version of the prologue, I gave him a quick scene in the prologue as well to kind of flesh out that story better too. And here's the debut of Funny Bone, and what a debut it was, because even though he's pretty much a psychopath, and as you can see here, he's killing people left and right, he pretty much immediately became the favorite character of everyone and became like the breakthrough character of the first 4 chapters of Warlord, which is pretty much the first storyline within book 1. And I have to admit, this was a very fun page to do. Like, I know I don't do action as much as a superhero comic probably should have, but one thing I'm told is that when I do make the action scenes, I pretty much go all out, and people, I think, appreciate it more for that as well. Again, this is total Nobuhiro Watsuki influence here in many ways. Very Rurouni Kenshin, especially that top panel there. And I believe I have told the story of Funny Bone. Actually, I haven't told it in video form. The origin of Funny Bone actually came from this Harlequin doll that my mother had bought for my sister years ago when I was little, when we went to see the Ringley Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus at Madison Square Garden. Well, she bought this Harlequin for my sister, this doll. And then years later, after we moved to Puerto Rico, my mother was babysitting the daughter of my cousin. She was a baby at the time, and sometimes she would be a little mischievous. Sometimes she would be a little rowdy and raunchy and noisy, and no matter what you would do, she wouldn't stay quiet. and she could be a handful at times back then. But one day, my mom, just to try to like quiet her, to like entertain her, she put the Harlequin doll into her crib just to see if she would play with it. And I swear she was terrified of that doll. She looked at that doll, and it doesn't matter the amount of time you left that doll in. If it was 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, an hour. If you left that doll there for like 2 hours or something, she would just sit there in complete silence, just staring at the doll from a distance. It didn't even have to be in the crib. It could be in the vicinity, and if she would see that doll, she would drop anything she would be doing and just stare at that doll. Like, I swear she was just like waiting for that doll to move or something so she could make her move to escape or something, because it was just mind blowing the way she would just look at this Harlequin doll. And I just thought to myself, that would actually be interesting to turn into a kind of villainous character. And that's pretty much how Funny Bone was born. I just gave a Harlequin doll pretty much katana blades and went from there. And it wasn't until these webisodes and then chapters 1 and 2 when people like really started liking him that I kind of fleshed his character a little bit more and kind of gave him a little bit more scenes, and yeah, like people just loved Funny Bone from the very beginning. And of course, here's Jane and Cheryl. And then this short right here, this is where I start hinting that even though they're best friends, they're almost like sisters, they're roommates going to the same school and whatnot, there's still kind of like that friction because of Fred, because Cheryl kind of always knew that Jane might have had feelings for her, Fred. And even though she never knew if Fred did have feelings back for Jane at some point, she always had that fear that those feelings were there underlying at some point. So this is pretty much just a small skirmish between the two of them, because as a result from Fred and Jane hanging out in the prologue. Of course, as we see later on in the story, Cheryl gets pretty jealous of Jane, and this was very manga influenced. These little quiet scenes here that are following, where it's just like, I guess, kind of setting the mood, this establishing shots. After all this like story, I guess it also worked as a kind of a breather as well. And people really like that actually. They like the ambiance of it. And I also like doing backgrounds, even though it has diminished because of time constraints. I don't do as much backgrounds as I used to, but it's something I want to try to do again, and just like give it more of a visual appeal to have like an actual background in the comic instead of like the whole gradient color in the background or something like that. But I think I'm starting to get there again. And here finally is Fred in his little short story. And the ladies went wild about this one. Like, yeah, like I try to keep it pretty equal. Like, I think there's been more butt shots of Fred than anyone else at all in the series, actually. Actually, yeah, Fred has had the most butt shots of anyone in the series. Interesting. And again, you can like see like the hinting at how close Fred and Jane are, like the little picture of them when they were in high school together. And of course, the flashback to the prologue of when they're just like talking and whatnot, and how appreciative he is of her friendship and all that, and that she's a part of his life. Again, like it's always been kind of this does he or does he not kind of thing when it comes to Jane. Like with Jane, her emotions are on her sleeve, at least to the reader anyway. because of course Fred is very dense sometimes and things fly completely over his head. Like he, even up until this point, he has no clue that she actually has had feelings for him for a very long time. And that's pretty much how it ended. A little bit of an ending there. And of course, this was originally the kind of like promo hyping up the chapter 1 and kind of doing it kind of like sitcom or movie style with credits at the end with the characters appearing in order of appearance here, being listed in order of appearance. And there's the end title. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This one I'm not exactly sure how long it ran. I don't know if it ran as long as the first one. It probably did. Hopefully it's not too long for you guys, and if it was, I hope it had some kind of entertainment value as the train passes by around here. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, for listening, and for reading, and hope to see you around for the third installment of these audio commentaries.